which is very interesting if you look at those websites. There's all kinds of little articles about him on the Huffington Post, and of course the book that he wrote. So, Dr. Russell, if you'd like to join us down here in front, the stage is all yours. Let's give him a good hand.
Metal detector? Okay, so I'm assuming that maybe I'm wrong. Like, you all think that the weekend and vacations are okay? They're good, generally okay, good things? No dissenters on that? All right. So we heard the folk music, but how about music that sort of like makes you dance? That like non-classical, non-folk, you know, like kind of sensual music that kind of makes your body move, right? Dancing to that, listening to that. This is Orange County. Be careful. Be careful. Be careful. Yes, we're okay. All good? Okay. No, not Neil Diamond. Just 60s hippie. Foo Fighters. Nice joke. How about, so for women, all right, so you think it's okay for women to wear cosmetics? Actually, you know, in Berkeley, they're not so sure about that, right? But it's okay that they can, right? You're not endorsing every kind of, but you're saying it's okay that they can do that? Color their hair. How about wear like brightly colored clothing? Like wear red, like bright red. That's okay? Okay. How about women earning wages that are comparable to or higher than men's wages? This is definitely not Orange County. Property, women owning property? No, because they mess it up, right? Yeah, okay. So we're all there. Oh, no. This is Orange County. Okay. This one might be a little bit controversial. So I mean, it's fine if we have some disagreement. But so, and this is the last thing about that. But how about women being able to walk in public without a male chaperone? Okay, so now I know who you are. This is good. So you're not the Protestant or Puritan work ethic. That is not it. It says you must work in order to be godly and virtuous and good. Okay? That was dominant in American culture, because who founded this country and who established its formal culture? The Puritans, right? Well, these workers just crashed right through that, right? Because if they were Puritans, they would have worked steadily with no drink. And of course, you know what the Puritans thought about drink as well. They would have worked steadily without drinking at all the way through the weekend to be godly, right? But these workers were having none of this. So they broke through, most importantly, not just the practice of working all the time, but of the idea that one should work in order to be good. So they really pioneered that fundamental intellectual freedom, that idea, right? They were the first ones. Without them, I argue, we would have no weekend. Now, the labor unions, people often think labor unions were the ones who shortened the work week and shortened the work day, and that's not entirely incorrect, but actually, this happened in the late 19th century. The labor unions took up the cause, not because they thought that leisure was a good thing. In fact, labor leaders of that time were highly puritanical as well. They took up the cause of the shorter day and the shorter work week, and they said this because they were afraid that these long hours would make workers turn against work even more, rebel against work, and do things like drink on the job and show up when they wanted to and leave when they wanted to. So that's actually why the labor unions took up that fight and got laws passed shortening the work day and work week. It was because of those drunken, slacking workers who are your ancestors. All right? So really, really bad people who did, I think, a good thing, right? So this Puritan work ethic, right, by the 19th century, and it's still quite dominant in formal, right, elite American culture, what was taught in the textbooks. If you ever read a textbook given for children, right, for 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, and I went through a lot of textbooks in writing this book, it's amazing what you'll see. 5-year-olds are told that playing with toys is the devil's pastime. That you should, the one, to 5-year-olds, and 6 and onward, that one should make oneself useful in labor all day long and not play, right? So it was really a part of formal American culture. Well, so we had these first workers who came in from the countryside and were like, what is this factory thing? What is this clock? What does this mean? Then we had some really, really bad people come in to the United States. There's work. So not you. You're okay. But the people you mentioned. So they came from places where there was no such thing as the Puritan work ethic. That idea didn't exist, right? Where was the Puritan work ethic and Puritanism invented? Scotland and England, yes. Yeah. So the work ethic, yes, both of those places, yes. So it was invented by white men in Northern Europe, and of course it was reinvigorated in the United States, but it was white, male, upper class, Northern European, right? It is not universal, certainly was not universal. It certainly wasn't natural. It was invented by human beings. They said it came from God. You can believe that if you want to, but there's a historical record in which there is moments where that idea was written about and invented, right? And it didn't exist before then. Well, here's where it definitely didn't exist. It didn't exist in the rest of Europe, basically. In particular, places like Ireland, where some of my people come from, Southern and Eastern Europe, where the Russians come from, and it also didn't come from this place called Africa, West Africa in particular. The idea that one should work, no matter what one gains from it, didn't exist in those places, certainly not in West Africa. Okay? So the slaves who were brought here from West Africa had no concept of this. It was utterly alien, right? And so they developed a very different attitude, or had a very different attitude toward work, for two reasons. The obvious one is that they had no incentive to work hard. That's the easy one to tell people about. But they, more importantly, just didn't have this idea, even once they were freed, that work in itself is a good thing, right? And so there's just scads of records of slave masters and northern people who came down to the south and toured the plantations and observed slave behavior, that slaves simply didn't have this idea. They were so degraded and primitive and terrible, This is what was said, right, about them. And there are records of this, of many, many records of people talking about the slaves working on the plantation and hoeing or whatever in a long line, and the overseer would ride by on his horse, and as the overseer was riding by, they would hoe, and then they would wait for him to go by, and as soon as his back was turned, they would lay the hoe down. There's also records of slaves sabotaging equipment, of letting animals leave the plantation, of doing all sorts of things to avoid labor, right? But we also have lots of records of slaves when they were slaves and slaves once they were freed, saying, once I was freed, I was expected to work all the time. If you look at the records of the WPA interviews done of ex-slaves in the 1930s, there are thousands of them in which they say this same thing. They say, I'm actually less free now than I was when I was a slave. And that's just one reason they were less free, actually, as free people. Another one is that Puritans and elite Americans generally had these ideas about dancing and the body and sex and sexuality, right? You can imagine what those were. If you look in textbooks, again, for children, it says, do not touch yourself ever. In the early 19th century, one of the leading, fastest growing industries was for devices that kept people from touching themselves. One of the hottest selling products, this is among whites, was a hobble that kept women's legs together. There were mitts that kept men from touching themselves. All sorts of devices were invented and sold on the market for this. Historians widely agree that America in the 19th century was the most repressed culture in the world, even more so than Victorian England. Okay? So, again, this idea that one should have sex only with one's spouse for the rest of one's life and no one else is a Northern European, elite, white, and mostly male idea. It was invented there, particular time, particular place, for a particular reason. It did not exist in West Africa, that idea. So slaves, West Africans and their descendants, slaves, have these very different ideas about the body and sex and dancing. Oh, by the way, dancing. So the Founding Fathers, Puritans, and then the Founding Fathers, people don't know this, widely denounced dancing. All forms of dancing, except by the 19th century, one was okay. One kind of dancing was okay. In the 19th century, guess what it was? One form of dance. In the 19th century. Square dancing, you're getting warmer. The waltz, right? The waltz is you dance in a square, and you don't have any bodily contact except the hands, right? And there were elaborate rules. I've read these rules written in the 19th century. Whole books were written containing rules about how to dance the waltz and other dances that were relatively like the waltz and okay. That was it. That was the only kind of respectable dancing in the United States in the 19th century. Well, of course, slaves come from West Africa, where rhythm and what we call sensual rhythm and polyrhythms, right? And dancing in wild ways that often sometimes involve bodily contact and sort of suggested sexuality and were okay, and no one ever questioned it. So they brought that to the plantations with them. And of course, slaves became well known for their music and their dancing. And that music and that dancing, of course, gave rise to what? After the Civil War, gave rise to ragtime, which gave rise to the blues, which gave rise to jazz, which gave rise to swing, which gave rise to rock and roll, which gave rise to rhythm and blues, which gave rise to disco, and which gave rise to hip-hop. All music, all of which encouraged, really elicited dancing in terrible ways. Terrible, terrible dancing that clearly is suggesting that we should have sex with each other. Well, it's true, actually. And that was the beautiful problem with slave culture. And this was the beautiful irony of slavery that people always miss, right? People think of slavery as the system of total oppression and domination. Well, historians have been overthrowing that for the last 30 years. The American public has been very slow to pick this up. When I still tell my students about slavery, I say, what do you think about slavery? Oh, it was absolute, complete domination, and the slaves had no freedom whatsoever. Well, it's completely false. Of course, their freedom was obviously limited in real material ways, but here's the beautiful irony of slavery. They were not expected to. In fact, they were physically barred from being American citizens. To be an American citizen meant not just that you had rights, the right to vote and equal protection under the law, it also meant that you couldn't dance, you couldn't have sex outside of marriage, and you should work all the time. You must work all the time and believe that work is a good thing in itself. There are cultural expectations attached to citizenship, and in this country, that's what it meant. It was a highly restrictive form of freedom. Highly restrictive form of freedom. Well, to me, being excluded from that is like being excluded from prison, right? If they pass a law saying Thaddeus Russell may not ever enter a prison, I would welcome that law and not form a social movement picketing in the streets demanding my right to go to prison. Right? Well, unfortunately, in many ways, the civil rights movement, which really began just after slavery, in many ways was that. In many ways was that. The civil rights movement actually demanded, and this begins with Frederick Douglass and ends now, but certainly through Martin Luther King, said, yes, we want the right to vote. Yes, we want equal protection under the law. Yes, we want to be able to drink at a water fountain, any water fountain we want. Who doesn't want those things, of course, right? But if you look at the records, if you look at Frederick Douglass and Ida B. Wells and Booker T. Washington and W.E. Du Bois, and you look at Martin Luther King, who did it the most, and this is the main chapter in my book, they also said continually, our people, black people, are degraded and primitive and not living up to the standards of civilization because they wanted inclusion, those leaders. They wanted assimilation. They said, we must become like whites. So Martin Luther King said, we've got to give up drinking. We've got to give up this music that is degrading. He called rock and roll a degrading music that plunges men's minds into immoral depths. He called it Satan's music. Okay? He said, we must work. He said, if you're a street sweeper, you must work as if you were painting pictures like Michelangelo. Even if you get nothing for it or very little from it, you should work hard because this is what we need to be. He literally said, we need to not be such Negroes. Okay? And that goes all the way back to Frederick Douglass. All right? So that's the thing that's often missed here. If you think about American culture now, and you take away the influence of ex-slaves and slaves, what do we have left? Who are we without all their influence? Who are we? I'm thinking like Sweden, maybe. Something like that. You know, I mean, I'm sure they're fine over in Sweden, but there's not a whole lot going on, at least that I value, without them. And certainly not without those drunken workers who created a weekend, which I love, because I'm all about leisure. I hate work. It's a terrible thing. I work all the time, but I hate it. Right? So these are the hidden transcripts. These are the hidden stories of people breaking social norms, not because they're political, not because they had some idea that, oh, well, I'm going to create the weekend so that Thad Russell will enjoy his Saturdays and Sundays, or because the people deserve this. They just did it because they wanted to do it, right? That's what makes my book different than a lot of books you'll read that are so-called left-wing. Left-wing histories usually talk about labor leaders and civil rights leaders and feminists. I do, and I say to them, well, actually, all those people were culturally conservative, and they were interested in assimilation and in making people match these expectations that the Puritans and the Victorians founded. Okay? So let's talk about horrors for a second. Okay. So let me, just because I haven't been controversial enough. So let me just take a quick scan. What's that? Gorby, man, you got a whole history. I love it. This is good. You've been everywhere. That, man, you are a filthy, degenerate trollop, and you know this, right? I don't even, did a man bring you here? Or what? A customer, perhaps? Did they? I mean, your hair screams prostitute. You're showing skin all the way down to here. You're wearing brightly colored jewelry. God knows what's underneath the table. I can't even see it. But every single woman in here, Adrian's yellow suit is absolutely too bright. Right? And her jewelry, just is yelling, I am available for sex, for sale. Well, don't laugh, because it's all of you. It's all of you, right? And I bet most of you have made some money in your life, right? And maybe owned property, That was not okay. That was not okay. None of those things were okay. Your hair is just completely not okay. Coloring one's hair, especially in the color of red, you know what red was called in the 19th century? It was called the scarlet shame of the streetwalker. The color red, to wear the color red on one's clothes, on one's face, they're surrounding me. They're all over the place. On one's face, blush, or on one's hair. Only prostitutes did that in the 19th century. Only. No respectable woman or a woman who played by the rules would do that, do those things. Cosmetics were really invented by prostitutes, actually. There's a lot of history on this. And bright colors. Right? Owning wages, making wages that were comparable to men's or higher, not okay at all, right? Property, what was the deal with property and women through the 19th century? How could you own property? How could a married woman own property? They could not. Thank you, whoever said that. Through the laws of what were called coverture. Every state in the Union had a law of coverture on the books, which said that in a marriage, all of the property owned in that marriage belonged to the man, not the wife. The wife had no property rights in a marriage, right? This was every state in the Union. In Canada too? Yeah. Well, guess who violated all these rules, right? So think about this. Here in the West, right? Talking about the 19th century, this was when the West was founded, at least by white people, non-Indians, right? So think about all the boom towns, when they would discover silver or gold, or they would discover that there was a bunch of lumber, or that cattle could be raised. All these people streamed in to those towns, right, all over the West, from the Pacific Northwest, where the lumber was, to the mountains where the silver and gold was, to the plains where the cattle was. Who came in droves to work there? In droves. No! Well, hang on, you're skipping a point. Prostitutes did not cut down trees or dig gold out of the mountains or lasso cattle. Who were the people who were recruited? No! I'm leaving if you keep doing this to me. Men! You're too intellectual. You're making these things too complicated. If I'm going to have to walk you through this, I don't... Men, right? This is men's work, right? And young men's work. You imagine, this is hard stuff to do, so it's men. Okay, so guess what the population ratios, the sex ratios in those populations in those towns were? I have found towns in which it was 1,000 to 1. Yeah. But certainly 50, 100, 200, 500, way more men than women, right? But there were women in all those towns. They came next. And those women were almost all prostitutes. Okay? So now, think about, as a business person, the market leverage you have. Think about The principle of supply and demand. Okay? Now think about being an independent proprietor in that situation and how much you might be able to charge for your services. Okay, it became such a crisis in formal America, in elite America, that the United States Department of Labor conducted a survey, conducted a very extensive study of this, and in 1916, this is after it had been going on for decades, of course, they found that on average, the lowest paid prostitutes, these were prostitutes who were not in brothels, who were the streetwalkers, who, by the way, I'll get to, were a minority, okay? This is the bottom of the prostitution industry, made, on average, exactly double what white, male, unionized construction workers made. Double. That's the worst wages for prostitutes, okay? By then, we also knew that a lot of these prostitutes became what were called madams, the owners of brothels, right? Now, guess how wealthy those horrible, disgusting, primitive, evil, un-American women were? Well, here you go. So a woman named Lou Graham was a brothel owner in Seattle. She ended up owning a giant chunk of the Pacific Northwest. She became so wealthy that she funded the first hospital in Seattle. In LA, downtown, you know where Union Station is? Okay, so do you know the area around that? You know what that was historically? That was the red light district. And the women there were, first of all, not just white Europeans. They were Jews, Cherokee. They were Cherokee. I'm talking about madams, brothel owners. Cherokees, Jews, Irish. Many of them were ex-slaves. These women owned a giant chunk of what was then Los Angeles. Then was a fairly small place. They owned a large part of the real estate of Los Angeles. They had, because of this, of course, they had enormous political power as well, right? In San Francisco, there was a woman named Jessie Heyman, and you can actually go and see the building where her brothel was. She had a few, but I think they're all still there. Jessie Heyman was so wealthy that after the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco, which burned down all these houses and people were sent into the streets, she and several other madams funded the clothing and housing and feeding of tens of thousands of San Franciscans. All right? All these madams also, and most of the prostitutes, owned guns, and more importantly, knew how to use them. Do you think that was okay for respectable women in the 19th? It's not even so okay now, except for, well, Sarah Palin's kind of bringing it back, but one reason I like Sarah Palin, but back then, of course, it's a terrible thing to do. But there's many, many stories of madams and prostitutes using guns to protect themselves, either from police or from sadistic customers, and so that is where we have many of the women's freedoms that you all take for granted, is in those disgusting, horrible harlots of the 19th century. They established all these freedoms for you. Oh, on top of that, dancing, back to dancing. So the jazz dances that blew up in the 1910s and 1920s, the dance craze I'm sure you all know about. So of course, the roots of the music and the basic movements were established by the slaves, certainly. But those dances, the foxtrot, the Charleston, the Texas Tommy, those were all invented. They're sort of systematized in the brothels of the Barbary Coast in San Francisco, right, by prostitutes. So that's what we have here. We have a long history of really, really bad people doing things that we all now take for granted. So I'd love to take questions, and that's always the most fun part. Yes, in the back. Yes. Or comments or denunciations, anything you want. Rants and raves are always okay.
Well, those are fascinating statistics. I haven't heard this part of history described like that. What was the reason why there were so few women in terms of the population? Do you know what that was attributed to?
Because the work that was available was men's work, clearly.
No, I thought you meant that there were, so that was just specific to the workforce, not in terms of the actual physical living men and women in that time.
Yeah, I mean, this was young men's labor. This was basically the men who would be willing to move from the east to Telluride, Colorado, and work in a silver mine up on the top of a mountain. Generally weren't going to bring their wives and children with them, right?
Okay, so they left them.
Either they left them or they were single men to begin with.
Okay.
Right. So again, supply and demand.
And was prostitution illegal, or was it accepted?
Okay. Great question. So prostitution was in fact illegal in every state, virtually every municipality. However, so the brothel, this was the era of the brothel system, in which that's where most prostitutes operated. It was inside a house, a place, with 4 walls, right, and a door, right? Yeah, in a district, sometimes not even in a district, but often in a red light district, that was owned by a woman. That was typical, right? Well, that's a huge advantage, right? Because you have protection of the 4 walls. You have a madam who owns guns and knows how to use them. By the way, the madams often employed police officers as security guards. They had huge power. Jesse Heyman, you couldn't get elected mayor in San Francisco without Jesse Heyman's help, basically. All right. So on top of that, I forgot to mention this. Typically in those brothels, women got free health care. They got free birth control. They got free clothing. They got free meals. They got free housing. Imagine that benefits package today. Right? That's a few of us have it, but we're declining our number, right? That was typical. Well, what happened was, and here's the tragedy, right, is that at the late 19th century, this movement arose, which had the name the Social Purity Movement, across the country, and unfortunately, sadly, it was led at the grassroots by feminists, by the people who would become the suffrage leaders. Men were often at the top of these organizations. There were many organizations that were developed under the Social Purity banner. Men were often the nominal leaders, but the people who did the actual work were usually women. And they lobbied municipal governments to shut down the brothels. And that is, in fact, what they accomplished. By the end of the 19th century, and the early 20th century, virtually every municipality in the United States forcibly closed all the brothels within their city limits and threw those women onto the street. Okay? So you could still, and then also increase prosecution of prostitution, right? So now you're on the street, you're more likely to get arrested. Now, who do you turn to for protection? Men who were criminals and not such nice guys. This gave rise to the pimp. Feminists created pimps. It's kind of funny and kind of awful, but that's why prostitutes today work underneath overpasses. Okay? Because brothels are now illegal. They were always illegal, now it's enforced. It wasn't enforced. Now it's enforced. You can't operate a brothel anywhere except in the middle of the desert in Nevada. Not even, by the way, it's not even Las Vegas, right? Las Vegas does not allow brothels. It's in the desert in Nevada. Yes, ma'am.
I love your message. I just love it. I love the way you're contextualizing all of this. And I can't help but wonder and hope that your message gets out to every place today. I'd love to see.
Book, right?
Yeah. Well, I'd love to see
and
you
give talks to people.
Yeah. But on TV and all of this stuff, to contextualize what's going on right now today. Yeah. And I'm wondering, is that what is happening? Are you able to get your message out and, that kind of thing?
It's happening. The book's been out for a year. It's been in paperback since July. And yes, I've been on about 100 radio shows, and I've been on TV about 6 or 7 times, and people are reading the book, and it's getting out there, and academia hasn't really responded to it yet. told my friends at my table that I was actually essentially fired for what I wrote in the book from Barnard College 6 years ago. Barnard in New York. Yeah, in New York. Yeah, that was where I taught. That's where I started this. I was giving their American Survey course, which was the history of America from the Civil War to the present. They didn't know what I was going to do with it. They just needed someone to teach it. So I started to develop these ideas. I started to do the research, and gave these lectures, which became this book there. And then a tenure track position came up after I'd been there for 4 years, which required me to give a lecture to the faculty. So they thought I was great because my courses, doubling and tripling, and, I was the head of American Studies there, and that, virgins and all these things. And so they thought I was great, and they thought, oh, sure, you'll get the job. Just give a talk. It's pro forma. Get up there and do it. So I got up and gave the civil rights chapter lecture, in which I exposed Martin Luther King as a Puritan, who was interested in basically killing African American culture. And I stand by that statement, and if you read that chapter, you'll see it's clear that he wanted to kill African American culture. Martin Luther King had nothing good to say about jazz, even, until the 1960s, when everybody thought it was okay. Rock and roll, rhythm and blues, he denounced across the board. He denounced black preachers who were too flamboyant and emotional for being, he called them too Negro. Okay? He said we have to give a calm and respectable sermon. We have to behave like they want us to behave. He said it over and over again, especially when he was coming up in the late 1950s as a national leader. So they fired me. Well, half the faculty really liked it, which was encouraging, and half the faculty thought that I was despicable. The half that thought I was despicable happened to be very prominent, famous professors at Columbia, which really controlled Barnard. So they said, go away, and got rid of me. Now, with the book, I have many academics who wrote blurbs for it, and many of them do like it, but they haven't really responded in a form. I haven't gotten a real review from an academic journal, so I don't know. But so I've been working through the people. I've been working, grassroots so far. On The View? Oh my God. I've been on Fox News several times, actually, but I've been on there's a wing of Fox News, it's the libertarian wing, John Stossel, and he loves me, and I've been on him 4 times. So the libertarians love me, but that's not the regular Fox News, yeah. Sean, Hannity and O'Reilly, oh God, Hannity and O'Reilly will not like me at all. Yeah. And I don't want them to like me, that's fine. Yes, I don't know who was next, but I guess, okay. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
By the way, Carol Edmondson heard him on a panel at USC, and she called me up and said, this guy is so funny, you've got to have him at the Edge, so I'm glad you're here, Thad. But Cripple Creek, Colorado is a very small town now, but at its peak it had 100,000 people, and they were all silver miners. And if you go there, there's a house, Montgomery House, which is on the right side of the railroad tracks, and it was a brothel. And it's a fabulous house because downstairs you can see the imported wallpapers that they used for the walls. They have fainting couches because the madams wore these tight corsets and they would dance and then they would faint on the couches. And it was the place that the Silver Kings came from Denver to visit. And the story goes that the best prostitute was going to marry a Silver King. And at the last minute, he turned her down, denounced her. She committed suicide. Her family came from Chicago. They thought she was a teacher and found out she was a prostitute. So the town buried her, and they took her in a wagon to the cemetery to bury her, and that's where the song, "There'll Be a Hot Time in the Old Town Tonight" came from.
I wanted to mention one other thing about both drunks and prostitutes. And I'm talking about in the 18th century and the 19th century, they absolutely both pioneered racial integration. More than 100 years before the federal government did. In the saloons, mostly the lower class saloons, in the early American cities, Philadelphia, New York, and Boston, that's where I start the book. I look at the saloons there. There were many, many, many reports of blacks and whites and Irish. And by the way, the Irish were considered to be what race then? In the 1830s? considered literally to be black. Or they were considered to be the missing link between apes and humans. They were somewhere between the status of ape and African American in the early 19th century, right? So Indians were dancing, women were danced in saloons, right? This is when it was not okay. Oh, but drinking. Oh, guess who pioneered that? We don't have to go any further. Prostitutes, of course. Well, the Irish invented drinking, but they're made of alcohol. They were phenomenally integrated. Low-class saloons, the lowest class saloons, and brothels. There was absolutely no more racially integrated space on Earth than a lower-class saloon or brothel in 19th century America. No question about it. Okay.
Hooray! And let's hope
One more
that
question? Okay.
let's hope that continues to permeate the mind of America.
Are you advocating drinking and prostitution, man?
I'm advocating that you have a point of view, that there are other points of view, and I urge everyone to pursue their own research and study so that you can make up your own mind about several points that have been made. I wasn't quite sure if you meant shiftless slaves as a pun or if you really meant that.
No, it's a great question, and I know.
Well, I'm going to continue to make my statement. The slaves were brought from a culture that believed that the earth was their mother and not something to be conquered and subdued and polluted. And I think that's a pretty enlightened concept today. We're trying to get back to our awareness that we're part of this ecosystem and we're not its master. The slaves' resistance to work was because no one asked them, no one contracted their labor. They didn't own the produce of their labor. Everything went to their owners. I don't think that that's unreasonable. Also, slaves didn't have the right to vote. They didn't own land. Unless you owned land, you had no say in the laws of the land. Slaves had to get off the sidewalk when others, not of their race, walked by.
That's right.
Slaves had to eat from the leftovers that the greater culture thought was unpalatable.
I agree with every word you just said. Here's what I'm challenging, not you. I'm challenging the idea that is dominant in our culture, that shiftlessness is a bad thing. So when I call people shiftless, and I talk about the Irish being shiftless, I talk about early Italians being shiftless, I talk about early Jewish immigrants being shiftless, and slaves, for me, and I present an argument to back it up, it's a compliment. Because to me, the Puritan work ethic has made us the world capital of work. The United States, and workers in the United States work on average per year 2, 3, 4, and even 500 hours more per year than Europeans do. Can you think of anything to do with 200 hours? If not for slaves and their culture, we'd probably be working even more. And my whole argument is that slave culture is at the heart of anything you can call American freedom. Anything that is truly about the individual freedom, to me, is traced right back to slave culture. Okay? And that's not just about work, but it's also about the body, not being ashamed of the body. Africans and their descendants here broke through that idea that the body is wicked and must be concealed. So that's the argument I'm making. It is absolutely not an insult to say they're shiftless. It's a compliment. It's okay. It's okay.